Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We're starting our deep dive today, and first up, it's a really critical conversation about monument conservation in India. Prime Minister Modi has emphasized preserving memories of those who overthrew colonial rule. But this article we're looking at suggests the Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI, might need a more thoughtful, maybe holistic approach. So what has been the traditional way of conserving these monuments, and why is it perhaps falling a bit short now?
Right. Well, the thing is, the current frameworks, they're really deeply rooted in colonial history.
Okay.
Think back to 1923, John Marshall's Conservation Manual. It advocated for pretty extensive repairs and, interestingly, reshaping the surroundings into formal gardens. Very much a colonial aesthetic, you could say.
Ah, okay.
And that approach, it still largely guides how we look after about 3,600 ASI sites today. But recent field surveys, audit reports, they're painting a concerning picture. A lot of protected monuments are, frankly, falling apart. It's gotten to the point where the government is actually inviting corporations to adopt them.
Adopt them. Wow. That's a sign things aren't working, isn't it?
It certainly suggests the old ways are struggling to cope, yeah.
Okay, so the article doesn't just point out the problem. It's suggesting a new path forward, drawing on some, pretty surprising insights from modern India's builders and other disciplines. What are some of these fresh perspectives they're bringing to the table?
It's a really fascinating mix of ideas, actually. First, they look at Sarvodaya, that's Gandhi's interpretation of Ruskin. The idea there is that conservation should actively improve the lives of people living around the monument and also those visiting it, and make the builder's sophistication more visible.
Okay, making it relevant to people today.
Exactly. Then there's this idea of translators. They're basically urging archaeologists to, acknowledge the huge gap between the deep past and right now. They want physical interventions to be clearer for visitors, easier to understand what's original, what's been restored, and importantly, periodically review the materials used for preservation.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about clarity. What other disciplines are weighing in? This is intriguing.
Well, we also hear from wildlife biologists. They're saying, look, focus on the ecological links, the connection between monuments and their surroundings, water bodies, fields, forests.
Right, the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, and they even suggest maybe dismantling some boundary walls to help those natural interactions. And then here's a really unique one, mycologists.
Mycologists, fungi experts.
Exactly, they study fungi. And they highlight fungi's dual role. Sometimes they break things down, but they can also have beneficial relationships. This could inspire conserving thousands of these small, half-forgotten sites like old city walls, cisterns, dovecotes, things that could benefit local communities.
Fascinating. Using decay to find new value.
Kind of, yeah. And finally, economists. They suggest valuing monuments by how things work. So, for instance, restoring a Haveli's natural ventilation system might be more valuable than just slapping on a new coat of paint.
Function over just aesthetics.
Mm-hmm. They even talk about using creative destruction for growth, like transforming old submerged temples into labs for studying underwater sites.
Wow, these ideas really do shift how you think about monuments. They're not just static objects, are they? They're dynamic parts of our world. So what's the core message here for us, ordinary citizens? What should we take away from this new vision?
I think the central point is that conservation's meaning isn't fixed. It's positional and contested, especially in a country as diverse as India. The article really calls on each of us, you included, to become more aware of our own locations, our own actions, and to learn to read the language of the stones.
Learn the language of the stones. I like that.
Yeah. And this literacy, the argument goes, will empower us to discover India as a monument without walls. And in doing that, we actually preserve ourselves. It's about finding that connection, that relevance in our own lives.
Okay, from rethinking ancient heritage, let's pivot now. We're moving to India's evolving foreign policy, specifically its engagement with Africa. This next piece spotlights India's approach to Namibia as a key example of what it calls a quiet recalibration. How does this strategy really differ from, say, typical Western engagement?
Yeah, the contrast is pretty stark, actually. Western engagement often involves things like conditional aid, sometimes travel bans, episodic withdrawals. Occasionally, it's even linked to things like migration deterrence.
Right, strings attached.
Exactly. India, on the other hand, seems to be pursuing a much, quieter, more adaptive approach. It favors alignment over instruction. And it seems to be built on this deliberate three-step logic, emphasizing partnership rather than, telling countries what to do.
That's a really interesting distinction, alignment over instruction. Tell us more about this three-step logic. What underpins India's engagement with partners like Namibia?
Okay, so the first step is anchoring the diplomacy in shared anti-colonial heritage. It's using that historical memory not just as nostalgia, but as a real basis for solidarity. For example, New Delhi actually hosted the very first diplomatic office for SWAPO, the Southwest Africa People's Organization, during Namibia's liberation struggle.
Ah, that's a significant historical tie.
Definitely. The second step is highlighting the depth and breadth of current cooperation. Things like growing bilateral trade with Namibia, targeted investments in capacity building like the India-Namibia Center of Excellence in IT.
So showing the present-day partnership.
hmm And the third step, which is critically linked, is laying out a future roadmap by pivoting towards knowledge-based cooperation. A prime example is Namibia adopting India's Unified Payments Interface, UPI. It's the first country in Africa to do so.
UPI in Africa, that's big.
It is, and it offers a model for transferring not just the digital tools, but also the regulatory frameworks that make them work.
Namibia definitely sounds like a strong partner for this kind of approach. But, has India's engagement, even with its collaborative spirit, faced challenges? Are there gaps?
That's a fair question. While Namibia's stability and resources are a good foundation, consistent follow-through, that remains a significant hurdle. India's developmental ambitions sometimes get criticized for uneven implementation, and its engagement has seen these, well, long lapses.
Long lapses, like how long?
Well, for instance, the recent visit by an Indian head of government to Namibia, it was the first one in almost 3 decades.
3 decades, wow.
Yeah. And while that visit was symbolically important, the tangible outcomes were, let's say, modest. There was no major agreement on Namibia's critical mineral reserves. And this is despite Namibia being a leading uranium producer, a really natural partner for developing low-carbon supply chains.
That's a crucial point about needing sustained commitment, isn't it? So what does all this mean for India's credibility as a partner in the Global South, especially with the India-Africa Forum Summit coming up?
All right, the summit is a really vital platform to solidify these efforts. But the article stresses, and I think rightly so, that delivering on this vision needs more than symbolism. It really demands confronting structural and operational shortcomings at home and making sure those strategic ambitions are backed up by sustained investment and institutional coherence. Ultimately, India's credibility as a reliable partner will rest on how consistently and collaboratively it follows through on its promises.
Okay, let's shift gears now closer to home. We're looking at domestic economic diplomacy, specifically Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu's recent trip to Singapore. The article frames this as a strategic move to, quote, repair the state's economic narrative and his own political legacy. What's the core challenge he's really up against now that he's back in power?
Well, the main challenge is overcoming the policy volatility that happened under the previous YSRCP government. That was the former ruling party. Mr. Naidu has essentially inherited a state that's grappling with seriously damaged investor confidence and a noticeable economic slowdown.
So it's a repair job.
Exactly. His rhetoric now has shifted quite a bit from 2014 when he was talking about building something entirely new. Now it's framed as a rescue mission. The slogan is Reset and Rebuild Andhra Pradesh. It's really about restoring that trust and stability.
That's a very different tone. So what does this mean for Amaravati, that ambitious capital city vision he had before? Where's the focus now?
Yeah, Amaravati. That was once the absolute centerpiece of his vision. But it was largely, as the article puts it, derailed, mocked, and abandoned under the previous government. So now the spotlight has decisively shifted to Visakhapatnam, Vizag. It's being framed as the state's economic nucleus.
So Vizag makes sense, right? Coastal city, port.
Exactly. It offers a compelling narrative, thriving port infrastructure, existing tech parks, new data clusters emerging. It's positioned as the gateway to Southeast Asia. So investors in Singapore were presented with opportunities in really cutting-edge sectors, green hydrogen, quantum computing, digital infrastructure. And apparently Google showed notable interest in setting up a data center there.
Sounds like a clear pivot. But the piece also suggests the conversations in Singapore were inevitably shaped by the past. How did the actions of the previous government specifically impact how investors feel now?
Well, the YSRCP government's sudden withdrawal from some key Singapore-linked projects between 2019 and 2024, that definitely left a chilling effect. And not just in Singapore, but really in global business circles.
Oof, yeah, that would do it.
So While apparently no officials criticized the previous administration publicly during the visit, the sort of unspoken message in private chats was that investors would, you know, revert after making an internal assessment.
Wait and see, basically.
Pretty much. They want to see sustained stability and early wins before making big commitments. And Mr. Naidu knows that criticism from his first term that too many MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding, didn't actually materialize that perception still hangs over him.
Right, the follow-through issue. Again, this really highlights the high stakes, doesn't it? What are the broader implications here for Naidu's second term, but also for state-level economic diplomacy across India?
The stakes are definitely higher than they were in 2014. For Naidu 2.0 to really succeed, these agreements, these MOUs, they must translate into tangible results. We're talking jobs, infrastructure,
Yeah.
visible economic growth.
Proof is in the pudding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If this Singapore trip yields concrete outcomes, say within the next year and a half, it could really consolidate his political position and maybe set a precedent for other chief ministers trying similar things. But if not, well, the trip risks being seen as just an expensive exercise in public relations. The article sums it up well. It's less a victory lap than the opening move in a long, complex game.
A long game indeed. Okay, let's transition now to India's innovation landscape. There's an article suggesting the country is really moving from being just a consumer of global technology to becoming its creator. What's the patent data telling us about this shift? It sounds exciting.
It really is quite a dramatic transformation, especially you look back to the early 2000s. Get this, for the first time ever in 2023, patent filings originating from India actually surpassed those from any single foreign country. They accounted for 57% of all domestic patent filings. That's huge.
57%. Wow.
Yeah. And even looking at granted patents, India's share has been climbing steadily. Remarkably, it overtook the U.S. as the second largest recipient back in 2021. And there's also a big shift in the types of technology. Computer science filings, they soared from just over 1% in 2000 to over 26% in 2023.
Huge jump.
And biomedical patents went from less than 1% to 10% in that same period. It really shows a burgeoning domestic innovation ecosystem.
That's quite a surge. This obviously didn't happen overnight. What's driving this growth? And also the improved efficiency we seem to be seeing in the patent system itself.
Well, it reflects sustained government effort, really. You have initiatives like the National Intellectual Property Rights Policy, the ADL Innovation Mission. These have actively encouraged startups and researchers. And amendments to the patent rules have brought in key reforms. Things like expedited examinations for certain groups, a big 80% cut in application fees for educational institutions, MSMEs, and startups.
Lowering the barrier to entry.
Exactly. Plus, the whole filing process is now fully digitalized, and all of this has drastically cut down processing times. It used to take maybe 8–10 years back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember hearing that.
Right, now it's down to 2–3 years, and some patents are even granted within the same year of filing.
That's a massive improvement.
Why?
So with all these changes, who is actually filing these patents now? You mentioned a shift. It sounds like the face of the Indian inventor is changing.
Absolutely. The share of patents filed by big companies has dropped dramatically. It was around 43% in 2000. Now it's under 17% as of 2023.
Wow, that's a big drop.
It is. Meanwhile, filings from individuals, they've surged to about 32%. And educational institutions have steadily increased their share. They're up to nearly 43% in recent years.
Universities are leading the charge.
Largely, yes. And this is intentional. Government initiatives like Kapila, that's the Column Program for IP Literacy and Awareness, and the Ethanol Innovation Mission specifically target higher education. You see universities like IIT Madras, they doubled their granted patents from 156 in 2022 to 300 in 2023. And IIT Bombay is leading nationally with 421 patents. They're really becoming innovation hubs.
It's genuinely inspiring to see universities becoming these patent powerhouses, but thinking long-term for India to truly become a global knowledge leader and, keep this momentum going, what else is needed? What are the critical next steps?
Well, the article points to something crucial: sustained increases in research funding. While the environment's becoming more enabling, the investment needs to follow. India's R&D expenditure right now is only about 0.67% of GDP.
0.67? That sounds low.
It is, especially when you compare it to the U.S. at 3.5% or China at 2.5%. The article suggests raising this to around 2% of GDP is absolutely critical for India's long-term growth and its global standing. Particularly, given the current uncertain global trade environment, that investment in research is really the bedrock for continued innovation.
A crucial point. Okay, let's take a deep dive now into something quite different, a surprising scientific discovery. There's a new study suggesting that biodiversity across the entire Earth is organized by a common, kind of hidden pattern, like an onion. What does that even mean, and why is it significant?
Yeah, it's fascinating. For centuries, biologists basically divided the Earth into these big biogeographical regions, Nearctic, Palearctic, Afrotropic, etc. And the assumption was always that the inner layout of species within each region would be pretty unique, idiosyncratic. South America's biodiversity structure would be different from Africa's, and so on.
Right, different histories, different species.
Exactly. This new study just challenged that head on. It asked, is there actually a universal rule, something that works across continents, maybe even across different branches of the tree of life, like birds versus mammals? Answering that could reveal the fundamental forces that assemble nature's living mosaics. And importantly, it could offer profound guidance for conservation.
That's a huge question to tackle. So how did they go about peeling the onion, as the article puts it? How did they look for this pattern across such a vast scale?
They cast an incredibly wide net. They looked at data from over 30,000 species, birds, mammals, amphibians, even things like dragonflies. Then they basically tiled the Earth's surface into thousands of equal area grid cells. And for each cell, they recorded all the species living there.
Okay, a massive database.
Huge. Then they used this network analysis tool called InfoMap. It's designed to find underlying community structures in complex data. They use it to group cells where species frequently co-occurred. This helped them identify what they called characteristic species, the ones really tied to a region's core versus the non-characteristic ones, the generalists that kind of spill over into other areas.
Ah, separating the core inhabitants from the visitors almost.
Sort of, yeah. And finally, they measured 4 key types of diversity in every single cell. Species, richness, just how many species, biota overlap, how much species ranges coincided, occupancy, how widely distributed they were, and endemicity, how unique they were to that specific spot.
So after crunching all those numbers from all those cells and species, what did they find? What does this onion structure actually look like?
The results were pretty remarkable. They found 7 repeating biogeographical sectors. Think of them like layers that appeared again and again inside every major region they looked at, and for every taxonomic group. And these layers lined up in a remarkably orderly pattern.
7 layers everywhere.
Basically, yes. The core hotspots, the center of the onion, were consistently highly rich, highly endemic, and had almost no foreign species. Really unique and dense biodiversity. Then as you moved outward through the layers, they became progressively species poor, and they were increasingly packed with these wide-ranging generalist species found across multiple regions.
So dense and unique at the core, thinning out to more mixed and widespread species at the edges.
Exactly. Biodiversity everywhere seemed organized with this dense, unique center, grading outward towards these porous, mixed margins, like an onion.
That pattern sounds incredibly fundamental. What do they think drives it? And what are the really crucial implications for conservation, especially thinking about hotspots like parts of India?
Well, the study found that climate models, specifically temperature and rainfall, could predict which sector or layer a cell belonged to in 98% of cases.
98%.
Wow. Yeah. Which strongly implies that it's the local environmental conditions acting as a filter. Only species tolerant of those conditions can survive in a given layer. Climate is the primary driver. And this new understanding of how species are spread, it can help us make smarter decisions about what to protect and where.
How so?
Well, take somewhere like the Indian Himalayas, a huge biodiversity hotspot. This might mean looking beyond just the traditional protected areas. Maybe we need to focus more on specific key habitats, certain altitudinal zones, or ensuring natural corridors are maintained between these layers, especially as these regions face rising temperatures and changing rainfall patterns due to climate change.
Right, adapting conservation to this layered structure.
Precisely. The article does also acknowledge some geographical gaps in their data, particularly in the tropics and the global south. So it underscores the need for more region-specific research, especially in biodiversity-rich areas like parts of India itself, to refine this model locally.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift focus again. We're turning now to India's really aggressive push for ethanol blending in petrol. The country hit its E20 target 20% ethanol 5 years early, which is impressive on paper. The government talks up benefits like cutting emissions, helping farmer incomes. But this article suggests we need to look a bit closer at these claims. What's the public reaction been to E20 petrol? And are those benefits actually being passed on?
Well, the public reaction seems quite mixed, actually. Yes, vehicles sold since 2023 are E20 compatible. But a survey by local circles found that 2 out of 3 petrol vehicle owners are actually against the mandate.
2 out of 3, why?
They cite concerns like a noticeable drop in mileage and increased maintenance costs. The government acknowledges a marginal drop in fuel efficiency, but tends to attribute the consumer angst to a vilification campaign.
Hmm. And what about the savings? The government claims huge foreign exchange savings.
Right, the minister mentioned saving over 1.40 lakh crore since 2014-15. However, an analysis by the Hindu newspaper pointed out something interesting. Major public sector undertakings, the PSUs involved, saw a massive 255% rise in their dividend payouts during this period.
255%.
Yeah, but they passed on only a tiny 2% decrease in petrol prices to the public. So the benefit doesn't seem to be reaching the consumer directly in terms of price.
That's quite a discrepancy. Okay, beyond consumer wallets, what about the environmental side and the agricultural impact? Especially since India relies so heavily on sugarcane for this ethanol.
That's a huge point. The supply of sugarcane-based ethanol has absolutely soared to meet demand. But sugarcane cultivation is incredibly water-intensive. We're talking 60 to 70 tons of water needed for every ton of sugarcane produced.
60 to 70 tons. That's staggering.
It is. And many of the regions where it's grown don't get enough rainfall, which leads to massive groundwater extraction and unsustainable irrigation methods. This directly contributes to land degradation. And remember, almost 30% of India's land is already classified as degraded.
So solving one problem might be worsening another.
It's a complex trade-off. Now, the center is trying to diversify ethanol sources looking at rice and corn, but that's led to an increase in corn imports, ironically. And there's international pressure, too. The U.S., particularly under the Trump administration, pushed India hard to relax restrictions on importing ethanol, calling India's domestic focus a significant trade barrier. That kind of move could undermine years of domestic investment.
So complex trade-offs domestically and international pressure too. How does this whole ethanol blending strategy fit with India's bigger goal of transitioning to electric vehicles? EVs seem like a more direct path to decarbonizing transport, right?
Absolutely. While ethanol blending has helped reduce CO2 emissions to some extent, shifting to EVs achieves much, much higher rates of emission reductions. But EV adoption in India has been significantly slower compared to other large economies.
Really? I thought EVs were taking off.
The growth is there, but the base is low. Only about 7.6% of vehicle sales in 2024 were electric. That's still a long way from the government's target of 30% by 2030.
And what are the hurdles for EVs?
A major one is India's dependence on rare earth elements, or REs. The production and processing of these are heavily concentrated in China, making the global supply chain quite vulnerable. Maruti Suzuki, for example, already had to reduce production targets for its new EV because of delays in getting rare earth magnets.
Supply chain vulnerabilities. Okay, so given all these complexities, consumer issues, water usage, EV challenges, what's the outlook? Are we going beyond E20?
It's uncertain. While the relevant minister has publicly expressed a push for blending beyond 20%, the union government stated back in March that no formal decision has actually been made yet. So it indicates there's still ongoing debate and uncertainty about just how far India will push the ethanol blending policy.
Right, the final chapter isn't written yet. Okay, for our last article, we're moving to a very sensitive and deeply complex topic, honor killings in India. The article starts by stating that caste is not an individual problem, it is a deeply rooted social phenomenon. It survives, it argues, because families, communities, social structures, they actively enforce and legitimize it. How does this dynamic play out, particularly when it comes to intercaste marriages?
Well, it creates this profound and tragic paradox. You look at states like Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Maharashtra, Kerala, places where Dalit communities have seen, relatively speaking, greater empowerment. These states also tend to record higher rates of intercaste marriages. The national average is around 5%, but it's higher in these states.
Okay, so more empowerment, more intercaste marriage.
But here's the terrible irony. These are also the states that report increased incidents of so-called honor killings.
That feels completely counterintuitive. Why would honor killings be more prevalent where intercaste marriage is more common, rather than where casteism itself is maybe strongest or most rigid?
Because these unions, these intercaste marriages, represent a direct challenge to caste hierarchies that have existed for centuries. The article puts forward a powerful argument. Honor killings happen not where casteism is strongest, but where it is most threatened.
Ah, it's a backlash.
Exactly. In places where the oppressed communities sort of maintain the status quo, where the hierarchy isn't overtly challenged, there's actually less violence because casteism isn't under direct attack. So this horrific violence is actually a sign of hierarchy under siege. It's a desperate, violent reaction to the perceived threat to traditional power structures.
That reframes it entirely. So let's take a state like Tamil Naidu. The article suggests it really embodies this contradiction. You have this strong anti-caste public sentiment, but also a kind of private glorification of caste. How does that actually manifest?
Tamil Nadu is a vivid example, yes. On one hand, you have a very strong and vibrant civil society with a collective consciousness against casteism, really shaped by decades of social justice politics. But individual attitudes don't always mirror that public stance. You see caste being glorified, sometimes quite aggressively, on social media. Anonymous accounts even pop up defending caste killings.
Wow, defending them.
Yes, so the state is described as collectively progressive but individually conflicted. It exists in this kind of liminal space between tradition and transformation. And the article suggests this social media caste pride isn't just about identity, it's also rooted in a fear of losing inherited power and the anxiety of cultural change.
Fear and anxiety driving the online aggression. That's a powerful insight. This brings up the role of the family, doesn't it? The article mentions family in perpetuating caste. Is that dynamic changing at all, maybe with the younger generation?
The article makes a very compelling case that caste survives largely because it's protected and transmitted within the family. It happens through daily customs, rituals, inherited prejudices, marriage norms.
Passed down through generations.
Exactly. However, it also points out something really significant. The psychological and cultural importance of the family itself is changing, particularly among adolescents and young adults. This mirrors global trends. You see falling marriage rates everywhere, new kinds of relationship models emerging. Many urban youth especially are prioritizing individual growth, autonomy, personal choice over traditional family obligations.
So the family unit itself is evolving.
Yes. And the implication here is fascinating, potentially hopeful, though it's a slow process. If the family becomes less central in shaping relationships, in dictating marriage choices, then caste may lose its strongest and oldest vehicle of survival. End quote. Now, caste won't vanish overnight, obviously, but the argument is that the cultural infrastructure that sustains it is slowly being dismantled. Not necessarily by direct revolution, but by these shifting lifestyles, changing emotional priorities, the very evolution of the self in modern society. And this contradiction that we see so clearly in India, especially in states like Tamil Nadu, while painful, maybe offers a glimmer of hope if it's acknowledged and actively challenged.
Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we're eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.